You're about to watch a recorded session from the Brand Podcast Summit. For more recordings or information on the podcasting events we have coming up very soon, go to brandpodcastsummit.com.
The Brand Podcast Summit.
So our next guest is Rand Fishkin. He is the CEO of SparkToro and Snack Bar Studio. He is a person I've been following for many years as a real, pro in the marketing space. I have so much time for the way he thinks and approaches marketing and content. Hello, Rand. Very nice to see you. I would say I've known you for a long time, or known of your content for a long time. Whiteboard Fridays is how I came to discover you in the first place. But I imagine you've been doing this for much longer than you were doing Whiteboard Fridays. But still, your current tool, SparkToro, is what led me to find you. So I'm led me to approach you to speak at this here event. So I'm very excited to dig into how that kind of works. And we're going to talk about understanding and then reaching your target listeners. We talked a lot about theory today. There's been some really great sessions covering the art of the interview and AI and how that interacts with podcasting. But I think a lot of the questions people are asking is, that this is great. I get it. I'm sold. I want to make an awesome podcast that resonates with my audience. But how? Like, what is the next step? What do I do tomorrow to kind of achieve that? So that's what we're hopefully going to cover at Rand. Hello.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you for having me, Harry. It's great to be here. I assume things have been going wonderfully so far.
Absolutely terribly. No, I've been saying, like, everyone's been asking all day today, how's it been going? And I'm like, I'm afraid I don't want to say it out loud. Everything's going really well and really smoothly, but I'm not going to say it out loud because I don't want, I'm a very superstitious man. But this is the last session of the afternoon. So, unless one of our hairs turns on fire, I think we're in good shape.
It's a nerve-wracking proposition, but I'll see if I can hold off on your superstition for just a half an hour.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. So over to you. I would love for you to talk us through a process. Again, like, a brand comes to us, they want to create a new podcast. They have a specific audience that they want to reach. And a lot of the questions in that period is like, there's a lot of competition out there. There's a ton of podcasts. There's most of them are interview-based shows in our industry. How do we stand apart? How do we create something that is different?
Okay, so I truly believe that one of the best ways to build trust, especially as a sort of consultant or marketer, someone who's advising with a client, with a team, with your executives, is to say a podcast might not be the right thing, but it might be. And let us first establish whether our audience or the audience that we believe reaches our audience listens to podcasts. And this is accomplished quite easily one of two ways. The first way, which is classic and folks are very familiar with it, is with surveys and interviews. So if you have a conversation with your sales team and you say, hey, the next 20, 30 calls you go through, can you just add a question to your list and ask the person you're talking to on the other end if they listen to any podcasts around topic that is relevant to our industry. So for example, I don't know, if you're selling to game designers in the video game field, this is a field that is close to my heart because I also run an indie video game studio, for those who don't know. But you might say, hey, I'm gonna ask them, do you listen to any podcasts in sort of the business of video game world? Not to learn about new games, but to sort of understand the business landscape, because we want to sell software to those folks, right? And if the answer is often yes, often could be 1 in 10, it could be 1 in 20, it could be 1 in 5, and they can name a few, you have your answer, right? You know that some of those people listen to it. The other way that you can go about it is passively collected data from the web. So this would be essentially looking for popular podcasts, potentially via YouTube. You could do it via Spotify. You can do this via Apple Podcasts, right? And you're essentially looking for podcasts that frequently publish episodes in your industry, have recently published, have many reviews and or many listeners or views on YouTube, right? So those metrics. And then you can use aggregator tools. So if you're on the enterprise side, there's a wonderful company in the UK, which, judging by your accent, I'm guessing you've never been to, Harry. But
No, I don't know.
yeah.
Where is it?
Well, so it's a little island. They have a king now, is my
Wow.
understanding.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I have particular fondness for the United Kingdom. They took in my grandfather during World War II
Amazing.
and sort of allowed him to escape the Nazis, which was,
Sounds like a good idea.
yeah, seems like a nice thing to do.
Cool.
And so, right, the concept here is essentially to find out, does the audience I want to reach listen to podcasts before you go starting your thing? And then the second absolutely crucial thing that I fear, Harry, I think so few people who build podcasts do it this way. And I would urge you to go this route is, how are we going to position our podcast, build a hook for the podcast in such a way that there's a great answer to the question, after listening to this, who is going to amplify it and why?
Yeah.
It's fine to serve your listeners wonderfully, right? To say, gosh, I heard this podcast the other day and it was really good. And I learned a lot. I enjoyed my 30 minutes that I listened to it. But that is not nearly as good as, I just finished listening to it. I need to send it to 10 people. I need to take a clip and share it on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on TikTok, wherever.
Right.
That, just the thought process of saying who's going to amplify this and why, will get you from low potential sort of reach to high potential reach.
Yep.
In one thing. It doesn't even have to be all that successful of an answer, right? It's just the difference between, this is not, I don't want to shame podcasters, but so many of them are, well, I'm going to interview interesting guests in area X about their subject of expertise. That's my podcast.
Totally. So this is a problem we see time and again. And so I love the framing of that question. I think it's wonderful because it's very easy to look around you and see, okay, podcasting is people interviewing other people about the subject. Hey, presto, you got a podcast and it's going to be wonderful. Sadly, that's not very compelling, and not enough people go that extra step and think about, like, okay, why? And so I love the framing of, like, what makes this recommendable, essentially,
Yeah, and interestingly, I think the framing of the question is quite important, right? Because many folks will say, my podcast is recommendable because it's very high quality, or because we have passionate, interesting guests, or we get, these top minds in the industry. And those are not unique differentiators, right? When you think about a product's unique value proposition, a piece of software, a video game, a book, an episode of television, facial balm, anything, right? It is about providing unique value you cannot get somewhere else. Sometimes that value comes from the price. Sometimes it comes from the quality. Almost always in successful products, it comes from accomplishing something that other similar products cannot do, right? I was thinking about buying this thing, but it doesn't do the thing that your thing does. It doesn't solve it in the way that makes me feel good, or that I trust, or that speaks to who I am, right? All those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So I would take your podcast's very concept, and I would try to find that unique value proposition. I think uniqueness is tremendously poorly invested in, especially in B2B podcasting. Yes. B2C, there's a little bit more, I don't want to say thoughtfulness that goes into it, but I think that there's more of a connection between podcast hosts recognizing, B2C podcasting is way too broad, and they need to have a pitch, an angle, a hook.
Yep.
So I would think about your podcast almost like you think about the trailer for a Netflix show, right? If you imagine, what was the one that was very popular recently that sort of shot to the top of Netflix, I think really based on the strength of the trailer, was there's a dead body that's discovered in like the 1890s in London, in the 1940s in London, in 2023, and in like 2070 or something, right? So 4 different years investigated by 4 different detectives, the same body in the same alley. That's weird. That's different. It's a hook. It grabs you. It pulls you in. And I would think about your podcast's sort of 4-sentence description in the same way.
Yep. And I think, in B2B, a lot of it comes down to I don't know if bravery is the right word, but I guess people are afraid of. We talked about this a little bit with Anne, right? We're kind of afraid of being too human or too real or taking too much, having too much of a personality. Ironic, it's like we want to come across in the right light, and I think actually, somewhat counterintuitively, or if you lean into that discomfort, that's where the goodness comes from.
Yeah, I wrote a popular blog post last year called that talked about how people need to not be afraid to make enemies, right? That in fact, inciting conflict and choosing sides and representing one side is a really good way to stand out in a crowded field. And it doesn't have to be in an offensive or problematic or politically conflicting way, right? But it does need to have an enemy. A ton of my content is basically about saying, I think the big tech monopolies, especially the big tech advertising companies, are kind of your enemy. I think that they don't have your best interests at heart. And I'm going to discuss why you can pull spend away from Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and repurpose it in other places and get higher return on investment, even though it is harder to measure. And that's a difficult position to take, right? Because digital marketers, as we know from the stats, put about 85% of their budget into those 4 companies, right? So this is, and I'm making enemies, right? Like nobody at Apple's advertising team is like, what, Rand Fishkin, what a guy, and that's fine. It's not, I don't need to appeal to them. And I would urge your listeners and podcast strategists to do the same. And then you take what we've talked about here and you put that into your title, your podcast title, the description, right? So the title should communicate that really fast. And then the description should expound on it. It needs to be that exciting, compelling, differentiating description. And then the guests that you invite need to represent that. And you should be guiding the conversations that you have in those directions. The best podcasts that I'm on, bar none, always have this focus, right? Where they say, for example, I was on a podcast that was in the tech startup universe, and it was about challenging the commonly held beliefs about how to build a tech startup. So it was not, here's the best practices. It was not, hey, we're going to interview startup leaders. It was, we're going to dismantle the standard practices that almost everyone has been taught over the last 20 years in what makes a successful tech startup. And I was on there to discuss how you shouldn't raise venture funding.
Right.
Which is directly in conflict with what everyone thinks a tech startup is at all. So that's the kind of thing I'm urging folks to do.
Yeah, I love that. It's really awesome. And look, I've got other questions. So we've got about 15. We're about 15 minutes into the session. What do you say we get specific? We get into the detail. Is that something we can do? Okay, cool. So we have. I don't know if you want to talk about something before we get into specific examples, or like how do you want to do this, Rand? What's the best?
Sure. Yeah. Why don't we get into some specific examples, and then we can go from there. So if you want to toss out some of our volunteers, I am happy to. We can take a look at their stuff, and then we can go over to SparkToro if we want to, and do some research and point out some interesting options.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really want to let you know that if you're enjoying this content, you're going to love what we have coming up very soon. Another brand podcasting event that goes even deeper into what we're discussing in this session. So for more information on that, please go to brandpodcastsummit.com. And if you're watching this session and you're finding yourself thinking, this is all great, but like, how am I going to get this started this week? I need some help with my brand's podcast. We'd love to have a chat about what you're working on. You can find all the information on how to contact us at lowerstreet.co. We also have a bunch of case studies and some examples of the things that we've been working on to give you a sense of what that looks like. So yeah, if you want help with your brand podcast, go to lowerstreet.co. And now back to what you're watching. Thanks. That sounds awesome. That's exactly. So what we wanted to take is these ideas and like, how do we actually do this? How do we understand our audiences listening to podcasts? How do we create something that is kind of different from what was already out there? And then be interesting to kind of think about how we get that in front of that audience as well. So one of the shows we had submitted was from Alfredo Salkeld. I'm so sorry, Alfredo. I should have asked you how to pronounce your name in advance. And he has so this is his description. A B2B podcast blends the energy of Queer Eye, This American Life, and How I Built This. It's which I love the sound of, to be honest. It's new, but already showing promising results and could be a great case study. And he works for an organization called Simple Texting. So simple.texting.com/podcast.
Simpletexting.com/podcast.
Yeah, sorry, I should have given you a link ahead of time, but it's called The Shoestring Need Marketing Help. So it's we come up, a lot of the podcasts that come across our door are in the marketing space. It's a dense space. We think about where are the most amount of podcasts in B2B, it's marketing. So I think this is an interesting one for us to take.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so let's see. First off, my guess is I'm gonna hide my bookmarks bar. Got it. And Harry, you and our viewers can see my screen, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Loud and clear.
Wonderful. So what I really love about this is it does have a unique value proposition, right? It is not just, here's a B2B podcast about doing better marketing. It is about marketing on a shoestring budget, and it uses the name shoestring. So Alfredo, bravo. I don't know if he's actually Italian, but I'm gonna make the assumption that he is. So I also like this description: big ambitions, tight budgets, talking about interviewing and talking through scrappy seasoned marketers, collaborating to find pitches and opportunities on small budgets, which I think is beautiful because far too many folks in the digital marketing sector are assuming that you have big budgets. I would say if this were me, I would try to add one more twist, and that might be season by season, right? So I might have a season that is very focused on B2B. I might have a season that's focused on e-commerce. I might tear apart the vertical thing, and I might have a season that's focused on a channel like PR or SEO or email marketing or those kinds of things. Just because, so this is an audience research kind of thing, but knowing the marketing audience well, one of the challenges is trying to serve all marketers together.
Right. And by the way, Rand, just for background, in case it's helpful. So Simple Texting is a texting service designed to help small businesses win, right? So we're specifically, I think, we can assume that their target audience here is small business marketers, which is, maybe helpful background.
Yeah. And I think that's great. And my contention would be, obviously with Moz, my previous company, and with SparkToro, my current one, I serve a ton of small business marketers, right? And talk to those folks all day. And I have found that they really self-classify and categorize themselves into, whatever it is. It's, I'm an email marketer. Sorry?
No, that wasn't me. I think that was a podcast. I think you hit play up there.
That's just playing in the background. They classify themselves like, I'm an email marketer, I'm a content marketer, I'm an SEO, I do performance marketing, those kinds of things. And so I think it is awesome to interview, folks like Zesty Urban Farms and the microgreens business, and figuring out why it's a hit and what this person's done. Terrific, awesome. And I would break that down one step further so that you serve exactly the audience that is interested in that. And when you do that, when you position it as we are X for Y, why the group of people not only knows it's for them, but they also are more likely to spread it than
Right.
broader group who's not sure who it's for or who needs to listen to the whole thing to figure out where the value is coming from. So that would be one of my suggestions. You can figure this out, by the way, again, through surveys and interviews. You can get it through passively collected data, for example, by browsing through LinkedIn and looking at, the people who might follow simple texting. So that would be something I would actually do, is go to simple texting. I assume they have, let's see if I've got their, is that the right? Yeah, that looks like them. And okay, so let's see, they're going to have data on their connections. When you have data on LinkedIn on your followers, for example, I believe I've got my SparkToro data, and you can, for example, see, so, these 16,000 followers, you can see data about them inside LinkedIn and who they are, where they're located, show you the people, all that kind of stuff. So you can break down and get this real idea of, are the people that I want to reach in this particular group, what sorts of job titles they have, roles, all that sort of stuff.
One of the problems with that, though, Rand, at least that I've found, is that the audience that you have isn't necessarily the audience that you're actually, so.
Yep. 100% agree with you, Harry.
So talking about us specifically, we serve large B2B organizations and help them produce podcasts. And because we produce podcasts, that means we have an awesome audience that we love, but a big portion of our audience is also people who love podcasts and produce podcasts that are in that industry. That doesn't represent our buyers. So that's one of the challenges I see here.
Absolutely. And so you can do this in a competitive intel way, of course, as well. So for example, if you found I know that I'm just going to make it up, right? But that awesome motive here, which people also viewed, or one of the other things that show all, maybe simple texting says, gosh, Slick Text or Zapier or Aha or Test Gorilla, like, gosh, they also reach our audience. If we could reach the audience that they reach, that would be perfect. Or, Buffer's audience is wrong for us, or Grizzle's audience is wrong, or whatever it is. So you can do this. The other way to go about it, versus the manual sort of digging, you can use tools. I'm going to show you SparkToro because they gave me a free account.
Good of them.
So, well, yeah, very nice of them.
Sound like good people, yeah.
Yeah. But I want to be clear that this can apply to the audience research tool of your choice, which could, you could check out something like BrandWatch, right? Which is quite expensive, but incredibly powerful, incredible what they can do on the enterprise side. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put marketing in their bio. So these are people whose bios and profiles on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, et cetera. Yeah, so lots of marketers, no surprise. And then it sort of shows you affinities for what they follow and pay attention to, which makes sense to me, right? Search Engine Journal and Ad Age and ClickZ and Content Marketing World, right? Of course, Joe Polizzi's thing. And then you can see sort of a demographic breakdown. There are more women in marketing than men, which makes sense to me, right? And a small number of non-binary, and then a bunch of people who don't declare their gender in their profile. And you can see data about what websites that they tend to visit, and what social accounts that they follow, what sort of words and phrases that they search for. You can see job roles and skills and all that kind of stuff. So we could go into, let's go into demographics and actually break this down so I can see profile terms. I really like this when you know your audience is in a broader category and you're trying to figure out the subcategories, because I can see in here, there's people in marketing strategy, there's people in digital marketing, there's people in advertising in here, like we talked about email marketing, social media marketing. And so I might be tempted to say, gosh, I really know that I want to reach social media marketers. Let's go look at that group particularly, see their activities. What are they doing online? All that kind of stuff. And that can be, super helpful as well. Oh, I'm going to do the bio search for this. So anyway, I don't want to take up all our time inside SparkToro here, but you're getting right? The concept here is to gain a deep understanding of the audience that you want to reach, break them into different subgroups, and then target either your entire podcast or episodes of your podcast at those audiences, right? You can even use this data to invite the right guests. If you see, right, let's see, if I go down here and I see, in the social results, oh, okay, Mandy McEwen and Sujan Patel are well followed by social media marketers. Maybe they'd be great guests, right? It's those kinds of things that you can do that are not difficult. It's just that legwork to understand the people that you want to reach so that you can craft the content that is likely to be shared by them.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, look, full disclosure, that this is exactly the process I went through for organizing this here summit. It was, so we want to reach more marketers, more, CMOs really. And we use SparkToro, but I'm sure there are other tools we could use, but I'm a big fan. I'm happy to.
Oh, and Anne and I are very well followed by CMOs.
Absolutely. So it led me to reach out to the pair of you, and here we are with that. And so, I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it works. There's, lots of people have signed up that are not already, because that was the big thing for us, is how do we reach people that are not already in our sphere? Right. And we can do that by borrowing the audiences of people who our people care about or listen to.
So this is a great answer to the question, who will amplify this and why? Yeah. If you bring on guests that have the audience that you want to reach already, that is a fantastic tactic. I would say, I think it's quite a common tactic. I think a lot of podcasters go there immediately, but you can do this in a research-based way. And one of the things I would urge, Harry, I'm sure you've seen this too, is sort of the big guests that have lots of reach.
Yes.
They're on lots of events, so they have a lot of things to promote, and it tends to be harder to get them to amplify your stuff versus sort of more niche, smaller audience creators who, when they're featured on a podcast, they go all out for you, sort of promoting it to their audience.
Absolutely. And I also find that, people who are less, if we move up beyond the sort of, it seems like Shoestring is one of these shows, by the way, that we move beyond just a straightforward interview, one-on-one podcast. And we think about how do we tell deeper stories? When we move away from the sort of bigger names who are just very comfortable with this format, they're always on, and actually it's really great to connect with humans that aren't always switched on, and they are a bit, they can open up a bit more and kind of, bring out stories that you might not hear elsewhere. So I think that's it. Yeah, it can be a bit of a red herring going for just the big name speakers on our podcast.
By the way, huge thanks to Alfredo. That I really appreciate you submitting Shoestring, and I'm going to give it a spin. I'll also make this offer if you would like me to come on your podcast and chat about some of our Shoestring budgeting at SparkToro. Happy to do that, Alfredo.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Rand. So look, there's loads more stuff I want to talk about, but we're kind of bumping up against time. I don't know if we have a question I can throw at you in the dying embers of this.
Do it. Lightning round.
Stephen, hello. Maybe you can help through all these questions and find the most compelling one we could put to Rand to wrap us up here.
Right, of course, yeah. So we had a few questions from the attendance today, and an anonymous attendee was wondering, what trends do you foresee in audience research with podcasting specifically, I'm guessing in 2024, and how do creators get ahead of this curve?
Let's see. So I think one of the quite frustrating trends that many folks will have to contend with is the loss of third-party cookies, and simultaneously, Google's making a bunch of these changes, right? Because Chrome is pulling away third-party cookies, but Google's also getting rid of Google Podcasts. And I think that those two technology transitions are going to make for a more complex universe, right? I think that a lot of, for better or for worse, right? A lot of what happens in digital marketing is, I'm going to say, like a little bit lazy, right? People look through their ad buys, they see that, hey, I had success with this, whatever channel. Oh, they also run a podcast. Great, let's go sponsor that podcast.
Do you think YouTube is going to fill that gap at all, by the way? Like, because obviously Google Podcasts ending, YouTube is now
I think Google is trying to send folks over to YouTube. I think they want YouTube to be the central place where this content is consumed. I think we're also seeing the a little bit of I don't want to say pointlessness, but audio only is really, really tough because the video content is often how you earn those new listeners and visitors, right? So sharing the short, I'm sure you've seen them all over whatever, LinkedIn or Twitter or Threads or all these services, TikTok even, right? Where essentially it's 30 seconds of a guest saying something really really hook catching. And then that sends you over to the podcast and turns you into a fan. That's tough to do audio only, not impossible, right? People do that kind of production. But so I do think, I agree with you, Harry, that it's going to head over to YouTube. Unfortunately, what this means is, as you know, with the YouTube algorithm and how that is biased, your subscribers and your brand that you build on YouTube functions very differently in terms of algorithmic discovery than podcasting has worked historically. And so I think, unfortunately, that podcasters are going to become battlers against the YouTube algorithm. That would be something I'd probably lean into. I still think the best way to build a podcast audience, by the way, is via email. That is...
I agree. Yeah.
I would not tell you to go YouTube first, but I would say that's probably going to be almost everyone's secondary channel after 2024.
Yeah, that's really interesting he said. I think, a lot of the suggestions that we're making is that, a lot of the companies we're working with, we're making very narrative-driven storytelling shows. It's very hard to translate that to video because, essentially at that point, you're making a Netflix documentary. You know what I mean? That's a whole thing. And so YouTube becomes this place to serve the short-form, clicky stuff, like you mentioned, as a discovery mechanism and then points them to the audio. But having a really robust video strategy for your podcast is definitely a big challenge that I think we're all as marketers going to face.
I saw Christine's question about monetization too. I hate relying on the creator pay. I think that if you build a valuable podcast audience, like we've been talking about in a niche field, you should monetize that by going to the brands and service providers and people who want to reach that audience directly, because direct sponsorship is just so much more powerful than whatever the creator funds that TikTok or YouTube, et cetera, have.
Right. Totally.
We also have a very good question from Alex, who is wondering, how can creators strike a balance between catering to the interest of their current audience and adapting to attract new listeners who might have different interests?
Yeah, I like that balance. I think it's actually really fun. And I do specifically, when I do content creation, not necessarily in podcasting specifically, but when I do videos, when I do tutorials, when I do research, publish blog posts, I am always thinking, who is the audience for this particular thing? And then trying to essentially balance it out based on the needs of the business. So, for SparkToro, we have a lot more need right now for serving our existing audience. And so I have sort of one big new audience attracting piece of research that I'm planning to publish in the next couple of months. But almost all my content creation is you're already in the audience, you're already in the tool and product. And so I'm showing people how to use it. Your marketing should serve your business strategy needs. Just full stop, right? So if your business strategy says, gosh, we need to reach more new customers, make stuff for new audience, right? Grow the audience. And if it says, gosh, we have a lot of people in our audience, our email list is huge, we're only converting a very tiny number of them, it seems like education is our problem, furthering, their use of our product or their understanding of our service or whatever it is, well, then you should lean into your existing audience, serve them really well, and show them the path. That's my position on it.
Right. I wonder, do we have time for one last quick question? Yeah? All right.
It's up to Harry. I mean, he's running this show.
So Emma is wondering, so she's looking at it from another angle, and she's saying that one of the difficulty in podcasting is understanding a current audience for a podcast. And she would like to understand better her audience, but she's been trying surveys. It didn't work. Do you have any recommendation on how to better understand your current audience?
Yeah. So if if you're struggling with surveys, my suggestion would be, number one, if you have their email addresses, I would pick a handful of people at random, say 30 people, and I would email them one-to-one and ask if they would be up for whatever, an interview or a chat, or if you could just send them a few questions over email because you're trying to understand, their needs. You'll probably hear back from 10, right? 1 in 3, 1 in 4. But that's plenty, right? Like I have found that 10 interviews, even among an audience of thousands, often gives you a ton of insight and perspective. If you hear something 3 or 4 times from an audience of 10, you're onto something that resonates with the group. It's kind of like election polling, right? They don't need to poll 300 million people to figure out who's going to win an office. They can poll 2,000 out of 300 million and get a good sense. The second option is you can use a third-party tool, right? Something like SimilarWeb can give you data on a website's audience. SparkToro can do the same thing. There's another tool called Audience. It's spelled audience, but with an S. I think it's .co or .com. But those third-party tools, right, that are in the sort of SparkToro family of audience research. You can plug in a social account or a website or a keyword, a thing in people's bio, and gain an understanding from there.
That's great, actionable advice. Thank you so much, Rand. I think we have some more questions, but I think we might leave it at this, not to overshoot too much on time. Harry, what do you say?
That sounds good to me. This has been so good. Rand, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in this, and I could speak about it for ages. But I just love this theory. I think if anyone has questions of how do I follow up with this, or specific examples,
Sure.
Please shoot them my way. Or I'm sure Rand is out there.
Absolutely. I'm rand@sparktoro.com, and I answer all my own email.
Don't forget, if you need help with your brand's podcast, we'd love to have a chat. You can find us at lowerstreet.co. If you'd like more content like this, or to find out information on podcasting events we have coming up in the near future, head to brandpodcastsummit.com.